One of the results of the work by the IMDRF in this arena has been the Clinical Evaluation Draft Guidance, issued in August 2016, and which the FDA released a few short months after, opening a public consultation in October 2016. Now, this is interesting for us for two reasons. The first reason is the guidance presents some useful definitions and outlines how developers should demonstrate the safety, effectiveness, and performance of software that impacts the clinical management of patients, which is on topic for this course. Specifically, the guidance provides recommendations for device makers on methods of clinical evaluation and the level of clinical evidence necessary to support the use of a software as a medical device based on previously finalized IMDRF guidance on risk categorization for software as medical devices. It also lays out when software as medical devices should undergo an independent review. For the second reason as to why this guidance is interesting, you have to wait a few more slides. On the matter of definitions, here is a foundational one presented by IMDRF. Software as a medical device, or SAMD, is defined as software intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device. According to this definition, SAMD is a medical device and includes in vitro diagnostic medical device. Also, software as medical device is capable of running on general purpose, non-medical purpose computing platforms. Importantly, this is software not necessary for a hardware medical device to achieve its intended medical purpose. And in fact, software does not meet the definition of software as medical device if its intended purpose is to drive a hardware medical device. It may, however, be used in combination or interact with other medical devices of any kind. Software as medical device may also provide means and suggestions for mitigation of a disease, provide information related to disease, and diagnose, screen, monitor, or predict progression of disease. Now, with this definition, and according to the guidance, there are three main types of software as medical device, depending on how the output of the software affects healthcare decisions. In other words, depending on the clinical function that the software is designed to perform. Software may inform clinical management, that is, provide information on diagnosis or treatment options, or aggregate clinical data from various sources. It might drive clinical management and aid in treatment, prediction, or diagnosis of a disease or condition. And finally, it may treat or diagnose. That means, for example, it might screen, prevent, or mitigate diseases or conditions, potentially leading to immediate or near-term actions. According to the IMDRF, level and amount of clinical evaluation required by regulators is in part determined by which of these three main functions the software performs, but not only. Also important in the determination of the clinical evaluation required by regulators is the state of healthcare situation or condition, from non-serious to serious to critical. The guidance includes information helping manufacturers appreciate what is meant by each of these states, breaking down situations by disease type, from minor to life-threatening, by intervention type, from slow and manageable to requiring major and timely intervention, and by user type, from lay users to highly specialized ones. On the basis of a combination of the significance of the information provided by the software as medical device to the healthcare decision and the state of the healthcare situation or condition, the guidance goes on to identify 4 categories of software as medical devices. The thinking here is that these 4 categories represent different levels of impact on the patient or public health, where accurate information provided by the software as medical device is vital to avoid death, long-term disability, or other serious deterioration of health. Category 1 of software as medical device then consists of software that informs serious or non-serious conditions, or otherwise drives the clinical management of serious conditions. Category 2 of software as medical device informs critical conditions, drives the clinical management of serious conditions, or treats and diagnoses non-serious. And Category 3 drives the clinical management of critical conditions, or treats or diagnoses serious. And finally, Category 4, where software as medical device treats or diagnoses critical conditions. Well, that was a mouthful. A further and equal important consideration is what is not in any of these 4 categories. For example, software including a mobile app that relies on, retrieves, organizes data from a medical device, but does not have a medical purpose, is not software as medical device. Software that enables clinical communication and workflow, including patient registration, scheduling visits, voice calling, and video calling, is not software as medical device. It optimizes processes, but not with a medical intended use. Also, software used in closed-loop controls as required by hardware medical device to perform the hardware's medical device intended use is not software as medical device, even if sold separately from the hardware medical device. Having established some definitions, the recommendation by IMDRF are as follows. Software as medical device in Category 1 are considered having low impact. Hence, independent review of evidence is not important. Manufacturers, however, of software as medical devices in Category 2, review of evidence, yes, not important, but with exceptions. Software that drives the clinical management of serious conditions which has higher impact should undergo review of evidence. Specifically, manufacturers should document their appraisal of the clinical evaluation evidence with the definition statement associated claims. Software in categories 2, 3, and 4 also, in this case, manufacturers should document their appraisal of the clinical evaluation evidence with the definition statement and associated claim. And here, independent review of evidence is important. Now, software in this subcategory, as well as category 3 and 4, warrant independent review of evidence due to the medium or higher impact that they have on health of the patient. Now, having established which types of software require clinical evaluation, the IMDRF further advises on depth and breadth of a clinical evaluation, which should be determined based on whether clinical accepted analytical validity standards already exist, as well as clinical performance evidence. Evaluation should be able to demonstrate appropriate scientific validity, analytical validity, and clinical performance of a software as medical device. Scientific validity evidence may be useful depending on whether the link between the software and a clinical condition or state is already well known, and such evidence may be derived from literature reviews, manufacturers' experience data, and scientific validity studies. Analytical validity evidence is the product of verification and validation efforts carried out under the manufacturer or developer's quality management system process. And at last, clinical performance evidence should be generated using real or simulated data sets reflecting real patient conditions. Altogether, evidence should allow both the manufacturers and users to determine that the product is appropriate for its intended use, performs as expected, and it is safe. Importantly, the draft guidance does not and could not explain the specific data requirements for each new software product. Such requirements are always based on the specific design of the product and intended use. What the guidance does do is provide a general framework for considering how to approach clinical evaluation given the complexities of medical software. Equally important, clinical evaluation is hereby not limited to conducting a prospective randomized clinical study. Clinical information could include publications, information on related devices, and other real-world evidence, such as post-market data. Also, clinical evaluation is described as an ongoing process conducted during the life cycle of software. The guidance explains that clinical evaluation should be an iterative and continuous process, conducted as part of the quality management system for medical devices. As it always happens after the FDA prepares a draft of a guidance document, FDA published a notice in the Federal Registration announcing that the draft guidance document was available, inviting comments on the document. Comments on the draft guidance were due to FDA by December 2016, and at the time of this recording, the comment period has closed, and we're still awaiting a final guidance. It's interesting in the meantime to review some of the representative comments received from industry. Take Omada Health comments, for example. Omada is a Silicon Valley-born company that creates digital therapeutics, meaning it designs digital and mobile ways to inspire behavior change in people at risk with chronic disease. They design health programs and sell them to employers who benefit from Omada's help in identifying the people within their employees most at risk for developing costly but largely preventable chronic conditions, like type 2 diabetes or heart disease. Omada's current program is considered a low-risk general wellness product, as it falls under the FDA's guidance of general wellness policy for low-risk devices. In their comments, Omada raises questions on the differentiation between non-serious, serious, and critical conditions, arguing that they're not clearly made, and the clarifiers are not static with chronic diseases. With the example of type 2 diabetes, an early-stage patient that is well-controlled could fall under the non-serious category, given that their condition is low, with predictable progression of disease stage, and can be managed effectively. However, as the same patient progresses to moderate stage diabetes and develops minor complications, they can be considered to have a serious condition. And if then progresses to late stage diabetes with life-threatening complications such as chronic kidney disease, it can be considered to have a critical condition. This hypothetical shift from non-serious to serious disease type patient condition significantly changes the level of regulatory oversight, hence the need, according to Omada, to clarify these definitions. On a positive note, Omada agrees with the FDA's perspective that clinical evaluation should not be understood to be limited to conducting a prospective randomized clinical trial, and that performance can also be determined using real-world data. Allowing the use of real-world data is important for determining the real-world effectiveness versus efficacy of digital interventions and allows healthcare companies to develop and disseminate their products more expeditiously. Illumina, in response to the specific question by FDA around types of software as medical devices beyond those intended for diagnostic, therapeutic, or non-diagnostic purposes, takes issue with the use of the word diagnostic, in that used broadly to refer to tests used for risk assessment, screening, aiding diagnosis, definitive diagnosis, determining processing, and predictive testing. This document, according to Illumina, fails to take into account this complexity of use. And more in general, the company points to the document using non-standard terminology, leaving room for additional segmentation of what constitutes both software and evidence. The issue of terminology is raised also by AdvaMed, the Advanced Medical Technology Association, and one of the largest in the US, representing manufacturers of medical devices, diagnostic products, and health information systems. Some of the definitions, such as clinical validity, scientific validity, analytical validity are similar to their use for IVDs, and they're not entirely consistent with other FDA or European definitions due to the inconsistencies in these regulatory jurisdictions, overall encouraging FDA to reassess, realign, and conform definitions. These questions remain open to this date. However, I will point out that overall industry has been very supportive of the proposed purpose of this document, and we should expect the work to continue until the purpose is achieved. Now, there is, however, an issue of completely different kind that is being raised. As I first introduced the guidance, I commented that it is an interesting document for two reasons. The first reason being, obviously, relevance to the question as to what software should be focus of regulatory oversight, and in case it is, how manufacturers should demonstrate its safety, effectiveness, and performance of software. Now, the second reason, which I did not mention before, is that the document marks the first time that FDA has released a software-related document from the forum as an official FDA guidance, which if and when finalized, it would have the same impact as any other FDA guidance document. What the agency did, they simply added a simple cover page with standard guidance disclaimer language, but otherwise released the draft guidance without modification. Of note, the draft guidance as proposed by the Food and Drug Administration essentially incorporates, by reference, the earlier software as medical device guidance documents produced by the IMDRF. For example, the draft guidance notes that it is intended to be a companion document for the prior IMDRF guidance document. These documents have been previously finalized without public comment in the US, and thus it is unclear to what extent these documents would also carry weight in the US. Most important among them is software as a medical device possible framework for risk categorization and corresponding considerations, which was finalized in 2014 and provides further explanation of the risk classification scheme described in the clinical evaluation guidance. How the draft guidance, if adopted, would square with FDA's classification of medical devices is today unclear. Context is important, and the draft guidance does use terminology defined in other IMDRF documents. However, FDA has not officially adopted the terminology. In fairness to FDA, I do appreciate that FDA's thoughtfulness and support in developing this terminology, in that it has sparked important dialogue within industry in the past several months. At last, it's been remarked that the guidance might be the cart before the horse, in that whereas FDA had long promised to drive guidance on clinical decision support software, at this time it has yet to be released. Without clear overarching policy on when software used for health or medical related purposes would be considered software as medical device subject to FDA regulation, the issuance of guidance on FDA's expectations for the clinical evaluation of software as medical device seemed a bit premature to many. Now, if you're raising your eyebrows at the mention of clinical decision support software, it's probably because I've yet to properly introduce this term. We've seen it once, though, in a previous module of this course, as we talked about the topics that the FDA-Asia workgroup recommended the FDA to provide greater clarity on back in 2014. Let's introduce this now, as clinical decision support, or CDS, will be our focus for the next several minutes of this course. According to the FDA-Asia workgroup, per their 2014 report, per a definition that is also adopted by the ONC, clinical decision support provides healthcare providers and patients with knowledge and person-specific information, intelligently filtered or presented at appropriate times to enhance health and healthcare. Clinical decision software encompasses a variety of tools intended to enhance, inform, and influence healthcare decisions. And these tools include, but are not limited to, computerized alerts and reminders for providers and patients, clinical guidance, condition-specific order sets, focused patient data reports and summaries, documentation templates, diagnostic support, and contextually relevant reference information. These functionalities can be deployed on a variety of platforms, including mobile. And similarly to software as medical device, it is standalone, not an accessory, nor a component of other hardware medical device. And last, clinical decision support software has a number of important potential benefits, including to increase the quality of care and enhance health outcomes, to avoid errors and adverse events, and to improve efficiency, cost benefits, and provider and patient satisfaction. Despite the similarity, it's important to note that the definition of clinical decision support software is both different and potentially much narrower than the definition of software as medical device. IMDRF defines software as medical device as software intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device. Clinical decision support software may not have a medical purpose. Conversely, software as a medical device might solve functionalities that are nothing like the ones I've just described and apply to clinical decision support software. Discussing clinical decision support software is especially important in a course on the regulatory framework for emerging technology in that it falls in part into that area of functionality that the FDA calls health management. Because its risks are generally low compared to the potential benefits, FDA has stated it does not intend to focus its oversight on most clinical decision support, intending instead to focus its oversight on a limited set of software functionalities that provide clinical decision support and pose higher risks to patients. Despite the progress of the past years, further clarity is much wanted.